Stochastic, here we go. It's your old pal EMac coming to you on a Sunday night with one Greg Ehrenberg as we are talking a little playoff football. We have an exciting game going on right now. Exciting if you're a Packers fan, that is. They're up 32 points. Shocker of shockers. It's now 48-16. Romeo Doubs having himself a game. I think of my 100 or so lineups I made across 3 different sites, Greg, I don't have any Romeo Doubs to my knowledge. This could be a rough one. He now has 6 receptions for 151 yards. Yikes.
He's only 1% owned, so you're not alone.
Okay. But I was going with Jaden Reed. He was like one of my core plays on my air quote main lineups on DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo. He has 2 targets. Being outperformed by Bo Melton of all people. Dontavian Wicks has 2 targets, yet he magically got a touchdown. And then, of course, Luke Musgrave in the mix. I have Jordan Love stacks that don't have any points other than Jordan Love. This is getting ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean,
that's okay.
I haven't been looking at because the game is well over at this point. So now the speculation online has just become who is going to be the next coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And the popular opinion seems to be Bill Belichick based on what people are tweeting, speculating who's going to be the Cowboys' next coach. Because yet another playoff collapse for this team, one of many in recent years, EMac. And one thing that's kind of funny, we've got the Packers now up to 48 points. You mentioned Jordan Love is the only player in your main lineup, it looks like, that's scoring any points for you. But I don't even know that Packers stacks are going to end up being the winning lineups because the targets are so spread around here. You got the big game from Romeo Doubs, but nobody rostered him. And then there's a decent game for Luke Musgrave. Nobody played him. The player that is most popular is Jaden Reed paired with Jordan Love. Jordan Love himself only has 272 passing yards. Just pulled up his stats here. Perfect passer rating, but they haven't had to throw the ball that much. You figure he's not going to have to throw the ball once for the rest of the game at this point. So as well as he is playing, he might actually end up not close to the optimal lineup for the main slate. We'll see, though. Depends how everybody else goes.
Yeah. Plus randomly, of course, we have that. Oops, sorry, I was muting one of them. I just heard you saying the exact same thing again. I'm like, oh my God, I have had to get the other window open so I could go see chat. So we have that Buffalo game got pushed to tomorrow. So I was playing a lot of the 3-game slate today because I had reserved contests yesterday Friday before they moved it. So that was kind of interesting. We shall see. And a surprising amount of injuries for the playoff, like AJ Brown, the Laporta issue. Laporta should be playing tonight. It looks like he is active, bringing us back to tonight's games. We have there was no surprise inactives, I guess is a better way to say things, but we weren't really waiting on anything for this game tonight. So that's a welcome change on this. Khalif Raymond, we knew, was already going to be out. And then let's see, that's really the only one that was a surprise. Obviously, Zach Evans was going to be inactive for the Rams because he was only in for week 18 last week. And that's really all the moving parts. Detroit is without Julian Okwara and Charles Harris. Their linebackers, Broderick Martin, is also not playing. And then they had a couple guys that they put on injured reserve. So some interesting stuff. One thing I found when I was doing some research for the article, free on the homepage here for tonight's show, Greg, was that Aaron Donald has made the Pro Bowl every year of his career, and he has been named All-Pro 5 times. That is absolutely nuts, including a year where he only had played 11 games. That was a year he made the Pro Bowl, was not All-Pro. And this year he, air quote, only had 8 sacks, which was his second fewest other than that year where he only played in 11 games. He's a defensive lineman. Defensive lineman getting, a half a sack every game should be celebrated, right? But people are saying, oh, he's having a down year. It's like, guys, that just shows how good he was. Now he's 32, still an All-Pro, just rather impressive. So this is one of the matchups we have with narratives, Greg. This is the ultimate remember me game. It's Jared Goff going against the guy who he was shipped out of town for, Stafford. So that's a fun one. And this is not the first time they've played. because they did play in that same year where they were traded for each other. It was in Los Angeles, nothing of note, and we're not going to worry about a game 3 years ago. But that's kind of a fun narrative for this one, much like the Dallas, McCarthy, and the Packers little scenario that's going on right now. But anyway, shall we jump in? Shall we take her from the top here? We want to shout out Owner's Box. Reminder, they are the sponsor of the shows. We're beginning to collect some people here. I see we're up to almost 200, but they are the presenting sponsor of the show. Remember, if you sign up with them, you can get up to a $500 deposit match with your first deposit. They will also be giving you a $5 contest ticket and a $5 lightning round ticket when you make your first deposit. It must be of $10, and you must come into the link that is below us here in chat. But that is the important thing to remember. But Owner's Box often, if not every week, has overlay. So that's something you'll want to check out. And they also have several other of the main sports available on their site. We're ready to jump in here, Greg.
Yeah, and so what I've got here on screen is DraftKings lineups. I've also got FanDuel lineups. So I've built out lineups for both DraftKings and FanDuel, and I've run them through the Sims here. So just as a quick overview of the slate here, I thought it would be interesting to look at the lineups that I have projected for the highest simulated ROI on each site. So that could be something that helps you guys if you're just looking for a quick lineup to play or something like that. And also, don't forget that if you sign up for any package at Stokastic, we got links for all of those below. It grants you access to our Discord channel, and we get the Sims package. So if you sign up for one of the data packages here at Stokastic, you get access to the Sims, you get access to the contest generator, all here, so that we could build lineups here on Stokastic and simulate them as well. By the way, people in the chat saying that DraftKings is down right now. I've been on the show, so I haven't gone and looked at it. Let's see. Is that?
I have not looked either.
The app seems to be working for me.
The browser is working. No, it's working for me, but I haven't tried to enter or change anything. But I just opened it in a new page.
Oh, all right. Well, now everybody. So it's funny because I had updated lineups before the show started, and people are saying, "Hey, issues with DraftKings." So I'm like, that wasn't what I was just experiencing. And then a bunch of people just said that, like, "Oh no, it isn't working." So I was like, "Oh, I guess it must be down." So I go check it again, and then it's working. So we must be the solution here, EMac. But let's go ahead.
While there's a chance, Team Free Money did drop some head-to-heads in the DK lobby, $1 head-to-heads, because I'm the last of the big spender. Username EMac, jump on in and grab those. I didn't play last night, and I lost my one head-to-head game against Seth. So I'm on a losing streak here. So take that free money while you can get it.
Well, listen, if the site is down, there's only one thing that DraftKings could do, and that's obviously to avoid all bets on the Cowboys today. If the app is down, then it clearly means that in some way it screwed up Cowboys bets. They would have won otherwise. But let's go ahead before
they owe their users, Greg. They owe their users.
They owe them. And let's go ahead really quick. We'll just talk about these highest projected sim ROI lineups on DraftKings and FanDuel before we start to break down the slate in a little bit more detail here, EMac. But for starters, the number one overall projected lineup that we have here by simulated ROI in the Sims tool for DraftKings, it is David Montgomery in the captain spot with Jahmyr Gibbs. So two running backs in this lineup here, Montgomery and Gibbs. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a second. Following up there, we've got Jared Goff in the lineup, Kiren Williams, Sam Laporta. So it is a 5-1 Lion stack. You can see that right here if you look at the stack types here. So 5-1. And then if we go ahead and look at FanDuel, my highest projected lineup by simulated ROI on FanDuel, it is Puka Nacua in the MVP spot with Kiren Williams, Sam Laporta, Brett Maher, and Matthew Stafford. But going back to this DraftKings lineup, because nothing looks all that crazy in this FanDuel lineup here, EMac, but I want to ask you about the DraftKings lineup where we have both running backs in the same lineup. Dave Montgomery in the captain spot with Jahmyr Gibbs. Do you have an issue playing the running backs together from Detroit in your lineups tonight?
I absolutely do not. I set no rules precluding them from being in the same lineup. The main thing we want to remember is that they can each get there in a variety of ways, which is important when we look at them. And additionally, they have, neither one has had a completely, I hate using the word, smash game while they were playing alongside of each other. They're both very efficient. And we know when things get tightened up in the playoffs, that things will be a lot more consolidated. So Gibbs actually averaged 5.2 yards per carry, which was like the third or fourth best in the league. And David Montgomery, the veteran, he had 4.8. So that's really good efficiency. That is very much attributed to the offensive line of the Detroit Lions. There were the Los Angeles defense. They are 20. I think they're 20th. I think against the rush, but even though they have a low rating, they have only allowed 4 players to go for more than 65 yards rushing over the last since like week 8. So my thoughts here is 1, Jahmyr Gibbs, 3rd or 4th on the team in targets. Monty also a good pass catcher, but he's sort of got the nose for the end zone around the goal line. They're both capable rushers. If we see the Los Angeles secondary able to control Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I don't think they can, but these guys would be outlet receivers. I also think with Laporta being banged up, we could see a little bit more passes going to these guys, maybe 4 or 5 pass attempts. So I think they're both perfectly fine. It's highly unlikely any other Detroit running back sets foot on the field. Craig Reynolds is their kick returner for kickoff, so he's active tonight, but he only plays 2 or 3 snaps, and when these guys are healthy, a lot of times he doesn't even make it in the game. So there's the call out for those guys. But I think these guys are both pretty good. We're paying for it. The salaries are appropriate for everybody at the top, so we're going to make some uncomfortable clicks at various points or not get all the stars that we want in our lineups, but you can play both of them together.
Totally agree with that. And a big part of this too is there's a for sure negative correlation. Wouldn't want to do it on a main slate, right? If we had, 8-10 games to choose from, honestly, even for the 3-game slate or the 4-game slate, which it was for FanDuel, because the main slate for DraftKings today was the 2 games today and then the early game tomorrow because of the start time change that we had. And then for FanDuel, you're getting all 4 games on the main slate. So even for games 3 or 4, for slates 3-4 games, I probably wouldn't want to play Montgomery and Gibbs together, but there's only so many unique combinations you can make for Showdown, where even if there is some negative correlation, that can be offset if there's a combination of players that were projected to be very low owned in the same lineups together. So that's one of the reasons here that I do think it makes sense to play Montgomery and Gibbs. And one of the reasons too, as well, if you look at the simulated ROI of our top DraftKings lineups here, 362.2% simulated ROI for the top line compared to 280.4 for the second best. It's because in this set of lineups, when I ran everything through the contest generator and the Sims, there just weren't very many that had Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery together. And that kind of differentiation made the lineup stand out. And it won at a pretty decent clip here, 1.8% of the time. This lineup ended up winning amongst all these lineups here. So, or 0.18%, I should say. So there's a lineup there, which typically we wouldn't build, but it's something that the Sims tool kind of helps us to identify. But now I'm going to want to go and look at some of the quarterbacks here, EMac. And we've got 2 to talk about tonight. You already hit on it. We've got Jared Goff. We've got Matthew Stafford. Looking at our DraftKings exposures here in the flex spot, Goff is in 45% of lineups, about Stafford 47. They've got similar projected ownership. So these guys look very, very similar in our data. Even the fantasy point projections here, 19.27 for Goff, 18.92 for Stafford. If you're choosing one of the quarterbacks here, EMac, is it Goff? Is it Stafford? Is it both? Is it hard for you to discern? Which quarterback do you prefer to get to tonight?
So it's actually going to be Jared Goff. So let's quickly hit on Matt Stafford. So remember, Matt Stafford, when he went over to from Detroit to Los Angeles, they had to attach 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick to Goff's contract. We had Stafford lead the Rams to the Super Bowl and a victory. So happy that everybody's happy. If you didn't see, Eminem made an appeal at some point this weekend for Stafford to just let Detroit have this one win. Okay. Because Detroit supported him when he was going to the Super Bowl, and they just now they want to get there themselves. So that's neither here nor there. We have somewhat of a pass funnel defense here. So you're going to say, why are you going to choose Goff over Stafford here? We'll get to that in a sec. But the pass funnel defense means that that Detroit has the 5th best rushing DVOA. They've been able to shut down most opposing running backs. They haven't encountered too many, like Kiren Williams, who's having a phenomenal year, but they still have a very good front 7. They do not have as good of a secondary, and Stafford is going to have multiple options. It's really consolidated down to 2. I still think Demarcus Robinson is a bit of a mirage. We know that Puka Nacua had turned out to be a bigger surprise than anybody could have ever dreamed. Cooper Kupp is healthy. He's gotten back to being mostly Cooper Kupp. He and Puka Nacua have traded off big games, but the challenge is getting touchdowns. And that's where I think someone like the Amon-Ra St. Brown is a little bit better. I think that I'm annoyed that Laporta was kind of playing in the last game. I understand why it was, but it's kind of frustrating. But I think Goff can get more touchdowns. Now, that seems to be, you would say, oh, well, that's a bit of a misnomer here. But I think the way that the Rams defense can tighten up inside the 20, I think it's going to be tougher for Detroit to run. Whereas I think if they embrace the pass, they still have, if they don't go with Goff, they've got Laporta, they've got Brock Wright. Both running backs are able to catch the ball. We could see some play action. They've got Jameson Williams, who hands of stone, but he is another option there. They've got, I'm blanking on the guy who runs the best blocker, Josh Reynolds. He's still out there for a ton of routes. I think the touchdowns for Detroit are likely to come via the air, just because I appreciate that Rams front seven in the red zone. So that has me leaning towards Goff. That's the ultimate tiebreaker there. More yards. If we were doing yards, I definitely think it's Stafford. But for touchdowns, I think it's Goff. And Goff won't be that far behind in yards.
Yeah, and by the way, if you guys are watching and you're in our Discord channel, you could add us over the course of the show, answer any questions that come in there. And there's very little that separates these quarterbacks, both DraftKings and FanDuel, in our data. So if you look at what I have on screen here, I've got the Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford exposures pulled up for FanDuel. I had it for DraftKings up in a second. We'll go back and forth between the lineups I've built out for two sites here. And if we look at Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, these are our two most exposed players in the flex spot on FanDuel. Goff coming in just over half of lineups. Same with Matthew Stafford, fairly close to their projected ownership. It is slightly over, but nothing all that significant. 49% for Stafford, his projected ownership in the flex on FanDuel compared to the 51% that I got to him here. And then if we go ahead and we look at some of the MVP exposures on FanDuel, getting to Jared Goff in 19% of lineups in the MVP spot, and then Stafford over on FanDuel, he is showing up in 13% of lineups in the MVP spots. It's like the slightest of leans towards Jared Goff on FanDuel, but once again, not all that much that's going to be differentiating them. And then on DraftKings, it was also pretty similar, where we're getting to the same amount of each of them. Jared Goff is in our top projected ROI lineup over on DraftKings, and then on FanDuel, top lineup actually has Stafford in it. So I think both of them are really strong options. Ultimately, if you guys are playing multiple lineups, they prioritize getting to both of these guys. Prioritize getting to Goff. Prioritize getting to Stafford. I don't really think this is where we differentiate our lineups in any kind of real crazy way. But is there anything else you want to add about the quarterbacks tonight?
No, but in a cruel twist of fate, I will be playing Matthew Stafford as my captain in the Team Free Money Showdown lineups because I couldn't make anything else work. The other thing you mentioned was everybody's so closely projected. If you just run basically an unencumbered crunch on DraftKings, you get like 6 different captains in the first 12 lineups, and everything is within 1.1 points of each other. So there's a lot of ways we can go here tonight. And that's what makes this kind of a fascinating slate. The offenses are, for the most part, concentrated. We kind of thought that was the case with the teams playing this afternoon. We saw how wild that or how much that went amok on us. But it's making for some interesting decision points because it's one of those, I can't fit them all under the salary cap. You're not really feeling sad about some of the players you're going to for the savings. We'll talk about a Donovan Peoples-Jones or a Jameson Williams, et cetera. But it's the, I don't have Puka Nacua, and I'd really like to have, how could I fit Kiren Williams in this one? Wow, I'm really playing a lineup with no running backs as my main lineup. How the heck did I get there? So there's a lot of paths that you can go down in constructing lineups. And that's where, circling back to the Sims, they can help take some of those decisions out of your mind because they are, 1, impartial, and 2, looking for various correlations, understanding leverage with the field, range of outcomes, 10, 20, 30,000 simulations of the games going into that. Promo code DRIVE does get you the NFL package through the Super Bowl. Max Sims package for $99. You also get the golf next week along with that. But this is where I'm wishing I was doing more with the Sims. I'm getting there in basketball, but this Showdown slate, I love the Showdowns. I used to hate them so much, Greg, but I prefer them so much more than the main slate now.
Well, what's easy about it, or what makes it easier? So one of the things that's really hard about building Showdown lineups is trying to get to unique lineups. And one other thing that I think is always fun to look at in the Sims, you could identify which lineups are going to be heavily duped. And one thing that is actually kind of interesting here is looking at the DraftKings lineups. Even though this one lineup is expected to be duped fairly heavily, it did show up in one of my top lineups. But for the most part, lineups that are heavily duped are going to be ones that don't project with quite as high of ROIs. But if you guys are curious as to which lineups are expected to have the most dupes for tonight, over on DraftKings, the most duped lineup is Amon-Ra St. Brown in the captain spot with Brett Maher, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jared Goff, and then the Lions defense. Over on FanDuel, the lineup that's expected to have the most dupes is Matthew Stafford in the MVP spot with Puka Nacua, Demarcus Robinson, Jared Goff, Cooper Kupp. So those are your lineups that are expected to have the most dupes by the field if you guys are considering playing any of those lineups. And meanwhile, in what is one of the dumbest things ever, the Cowboys, because they're scoring all these garbage time points, Dak Prescott's going to be the highest scoring quarterback, it looks like, on the entire slate, which is so dumb. It's often why some of the scoring for football gets to be really weird, particularly with quarterbacks, because it's almost like if Dak Prescott played a little bit better, he wouldn't be optimal because the defense wouldn't be playing prevent at this time of the game. Like, Dak is ultimately benefiting from throwing a pick six earlier in the game at this point. He would have, if he didn't throw a pick six, he would have less fantasy points now.
Did you just hear that scream coming from the West Coast where Eric Lindquist is sitting on his couch after he pushed his chips in on Jordan Love and was going against Dak Prescott, and it looked like he made the right call? Sorry, Lindy. Sorry.
Good. All right. So I'm on board with it. I thought the scoring was stupid. Now I like it. If it's going to screw over Eric, I'm on. All right. Seems like good. They're doing it the right way. They're doing it the right way. I do agree with what
I'm getting a DK error for what it's worth. So,
is it back down again?
It could be.
I think here's the best solution here is what Eric
is to upload your lineups.
I'm talking about for QB scoring. Eric Ronis is saying that picks should be worth more than one. I totally agree. We should see interceptions worth, like, I don't know, -3 or something like that. If you up the value of, and also just got rid of defenses in general, but if you get rid of, or you make interceptions worth more of a negative towards quarterbacks, then it's a little bit more representative whether they play, well, or if they play poorly. Because I do agree that should be a bigger negative, because just them only getting -1 points for an interception, fairly stupid, because there is a lot more value to a negative in terms of negative value for an interception otherwise. And instead, Dak Prescott's benefiting from throwing interceptions today. That aside, and DraftKings apparently not working, let's go back.
It's now back up. I'm going to make some lineups right now because I don't trust it.
Well,
very slow.
I don't know what you root for in these situations, but I can tell you, for me, I root for it to not work, because then you're just free rolling the slate and it doesn't matter what happened. If the site goes down and you can't update your lineups, cool, we're all playing for free because the slate gets refunded tomorrow. So that to me is the best case scenario.
Yeah, I don't. So wait, how does it work? If it doesn't work, they play do they just refund the entire slate and they don't pay out the contract?
The way typically the DraftKings does these slates, and it's been a long time because the site
it's been a long time. I can't remember the rules.
Yeah. So whenever there's a site error, what they do is if you win, cool, you win. But if you lose, they refund the differences between your entry fees and what you got back. So let's say you had $100 in entry fees, you get $50 back. But if the site didn't work and you say, like, hey, I tried to update my lineup so it wasn't able to, then they'll make up the difference. They give you like $50 in DK dollars. So that to me is like the nut scenario, but it's probably going to be back up soon.
All right.
Let's talk about the running backs here, right? So we've got a couple of running backs to talk about on today's slate, starting with the Lions side of the game, EMac. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. If you can only play one Lions running back, which way would you go, Gibbs or Montgomery?
So I have a feeling this is the chalk donkey answer, but I would lean towards Jahmyr Gibbs just because he has done more with his receptions. We know from Montgomery's time with the Chicago Bears, he's a perfectly capable receiver. That just hasn't been his particular role. I want to say he only has something like 16 or 20 targets, something along those lines. It's not a lot. It just, there's a lot of capable pass catchers on this. So Montgomery, and the cool thing about Montgomery, though, 13 rushing touchdowns, 1,000 yards, did that all in 14 games. So that's the nod towards him. Gibbs just missed the 1,000-yard milestone. He was 55 yards short, and he played in 15 games. He did have 10 touchdowns, and he also had 71 targets for another 316 yards. So it's clear that they do want to have him be the pass catcher. Even though Montgomery is capable, it does seem that they're looking to get Gibbs in space. So that is what gives me the slight edge. The salaries are, if I remember correctly, I believe there's a discount on FanDuel for one of. Do you have the FanDuel price up? Sorry, now my computer is moving at Mock Turtle speed.
Yeah, so over on FanDuel, we have David Montgomery priced at $11,500, Jahmyr Gibbs $10,500. So $1,000 separating them. They are, let's see, Montgomery is the 5th most expensive player on FanDuel, and Gibbs is the 7th most expensive player.
And it's flipped on DraftKings, but that full PPR and the more targets kind of even it out. So this is if I was where I'm finishing up, if I was on FanDuel, I would still probably go Montgomery. Gibbs is my for sure guy on DraftKings.
Yeah, and over on DraftKings, Gibbs is $8,800. Montgomery $6,800. We are getting to a little bit of both of them in the Sims as far as the top lineups I have here. David Montgomery is getting well overweight to the field to him relatively in the captain spot, about double the field on him as the captain, and then in the flex spot, 5% overweight to him there. 30% of lineups containing Gibbs in the flex spot compared to 25% projected ownership in the flex spot. Jahmyr Gibbs, meanwhile, fairly similar exposure there, 28.7% in the flex spot, although less than the captain at 4.7%. And that's just a factor of the pricing, like $2,000 salary difference. That's going to equate to $3,000 salary difference once we're looking at the captain spot. And that does open up a whole big difference as far as the DraftKings pricing goes. So that's what we're looking at on DK. And then the scoring on FanDuel, like you had mentioned, EMac, it's definitely more favorable towards David Montgomery. So I want to pull up my FanDuel lineups that I have here and see what is the exposure looking like across the two, because my intuition tells me that David Montgomery is the running back that I would prefer to get to over on FanDuel. But let's see what the ownership is, because that could end up making a difference for sure. Montgomery showing up in 19% of lineups in the flex spot, hardly showing up at all in the captain, though. Whereas Jahmyr Gibbs, on the other hand, is actually showing up in a whole bunch more lineups. So on FanDuel, actually, the Sims are getting me to more of Jahmyr Gibbs. And I guess that is a factor of some of that reduced pricing. So data here for us, liking the cheaper running back on each site, which is Jahmyr Gibbs on FanDuel. It is David Montgomery on DraftKings. So that's where the salary is going to make a little bit of a difference here. By the way, all of a sudden, Cowboys down by 2 touchdowns, and they have the ball with 2 minutes left. So maybe they score a touchdown here, convert the 2-point conversion, recover the onside kick. And then all of a sudden, we got Dak Prescott finishing the game inexplicably with like a gazillion fantasy points.
He's legitimately in play for 400 yards right now, Greg.
Yep.
He's got 351. So
yeah, monster fantasy game, because clearly he's been the best quarterback of the entire weekend so far. Clearly.
Boy, this is why they play the games, Greg. This is why.
By the way, a dumb sweat for me. I do have Brandon Cooks for over 39.5 receiving yards. Do you know how many receiving yards he's at right now, EMac? Would you like to guess?
Let me guess, 38?
39. He's at 39. I've got over. So I need one more garbage time catch for Brandon Cooks here, or for him to get stat corrected 1 yard here. So that's what we're looking at as far as the Lions running backs. For sure, both of them are viable, but ultimately, I think it makes more sense to get to, based on the data here, whichever running back is cheaper is going to be the one that our data prefers across each site here. But let's now go ahead and look at Kiren Williams and the running back situation for the Rams. There's not really a backup that we want to be considering in any kind of real meaningful way for the Rams. But as far as Kiren Williams goes, EMac, he is expensive. He's one of the more expensive players on the slate. Right now, I do have my FanDuel exposures pulled up here, and then we'll look at DraftKings afterwards. Kiren Williams, second most expensive player overall on FanDuel. How does he stack up to you relative to some of the Lions running backs?
So, God, that is the perfectly viable way to frame that question. I actually have him ranked as the second player overall behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. And my note in the free article says the consolidated backfield gives him the edge over his Detroit counterparts. Because again, while we like both those guys, they're both live for touchdowns. They can't each run across the ball or run across the goal line holding the ball together. They can, but only one of them is going to get credit for a touchdown. Kiren Williams, he had 1,144 yards. He led the league with 95.3 rushing yards per game. He earned a Pro Bowl nomination and was the second team All-Pro. That's despite missing 5 games, Greg. That's how good his season was. I mean, that's up there with the likes of, I hate to compare him to Christian McCaffrey, but statistically, even though he missed those 5 games, his rates are very, very close to that. Since returning from his injury, he has had at least 16 rushing attempts in his 5 games, 20 or more in 4 of them, and at least 87 yards rushing. He is averaging almost 22 carries in that stretch for 115 yards, 6 touchdowns. He has 19 more catches and 100 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. So he's consolidating that similar work that the Detroit backs are sharing. The only challenge is, as we mentioned, Detroit does have a pretty good rushing defense up front, which encourages teams to pass against them.
And we'll see right here, as far as Kiren Williams goes, I get into a pretty good chunk of him. Although with that said, he is expected to be popular. So it's not like there's any kind of real stand here, other than the fact that in the captain spot, 15% of Kiren Williams for me here on DraftKings. Also was a similar number over on FanDuel. If you guys were looking at the FanDuel MVP exposures I had up there before, it was very spread out. There was a bunch of guys that I was getting to double-digit exposure to. There wasn't like one guy who's showing up in 50% of lineups as the captain or anything. Kiren Williams definitely in the mix and someone to be overweight to here. Where, oh, by the way, people in the chat saying that a Brandon Cooks
catch.
There we go, 8-yard catch, cashes. It's the one bet I posted today for football. But anyway, yeah, so Kiren Williams, somebody who I definitely like getting to here in the captain spot. If you guys are playing single entry, I think Kiren Williams, pretty strong-looking captain option. He's showing up in 15% of my top 150 lineups here on DraftKings. But is there anybody else out of the backfield for the Rams that you are considering getting to, EMac?
So the only one I kind of looked at a little bit was Ronnie Rivers. And I even thought about putting him in my cash game lineup. Then I wanted to slap myself silly. He seems to have overtaken Royce Freeman for the RB2 role. However, Freeman was inactive, but Rivers was not in week 18. But I still think Rivers has the edge. If he screws up in any form or fashion, they need to go away from Williams, they're going to go to Royce Freeman, right? It's a very tenuous group at this point. For everybody says, oh, Freeman, he isn't involved in the passing game, he can't catch. Go back to his Broncos days. He was a decent receiver. That's just not his role in the Rams game, Rams offense. And when you remember that they throw the ball to the receivers on short A-dot targets, of course the running backs don't get as many touches. And who would you rather have getting the ball? Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp or Royce Freeman? Yeah, definitely those other guys. So I don't think I'm not crossing them out of my player pool, but I don't expect either one of them to combined. Let's set the over-under at 5.5 touches.
That's an easy under for me.
Barring a blowout. Yeah, I don't see it.
Yeah, and if you guys are looking right here, I've been scrolling through my exposure on FanDuel.
And that was for both of them together.
Yeah. And then I just really quickly here also sorted by those players. And across 150 lineups on FanDuel, 150 lineups on DraftKings EMac. So 300 lineups. A total of 0 shares of Freeman or Rivers. So the only running back I'm getting to.
Prescott has 400 yards just because.
Hey, why not? Why not? He's clearly playing great today. He should be rewarded as being the highest scoring player on the slate by a mile. Why not? Why not? What a weird way for the chalk to get there. Just get blown out so bad that the other team stops playing and you just rack up garbage time points. But if we go ahead and look at these running backs, there's only 3 running backs in the entire game that I'm getting exposure to. And, I think a lot of people will be like, yeah, why would you get to these other guys? But in showdown contests, it's often that I'll take punts on some of these lower owned, low price running backs. That's not the spot today. No exposure to Rivers or to Freeman on any of my FanDuel or DraftKings lineups. Just sticking to the core running backs, but I do think there's some spots we could talk about getting different at the wide receivers here, EMac. Is there anything else you want to add about the RBs from this game?
No, I think that covers everything. It's really the three. It's a 2-1 situation.
All right. So let's go ahead and start looking at some of those wide receivers. And we got a bunch of studs at wide out today, Mac. We've got Puka Nacua. We've got Cooper Kupp. We've got Amon-Ra St. Brown. If you can only pay up for one of these stud wide receivers, who would it be? Three really good options between Kupp, Nacua, as well as Amon-Ra St. Brown. Pick your favorite.
So for me, it's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown, the sun god. Easier to just call him the sun god. Hey, guess what? He didn't make the Pro Bowl, but he was the all-pro receiver. That's pretty weird. So the powers that be deemed him the best receiver in the game, but he didn't make the Pro Bowl. So crazy. This year he was fourth in the league with 95 yards per game. He was third with 1,500 yards receiving, and he was pretty much top 5 in every other category. We know Khalif Raymond is out. That means Josh Reynolds is going to be on the field a ton, running routes and blocking. Jameson Williams will work in somewhat, and then now Donovan Peoples-Jones is likely to return punts in place of Raymond, and he is likely to get on the field a little bit more than normal. I would expect 12 snaps for him, maybe 1 or 2 targets. But Amon-Ra St. Brown commands everything in this offense. Now, he's going to have attention on the defense, but this is nothing new. He's been dealing with double teams for the last 30 games, and he's still getting there. So he is one of the best in the game. He is an actual god. So I guess that gives him a chance to just banish these mere mortals. So he is the number one guy. The challenge with Nacua and Kupp is they can kind of counter each other. I could see them both getting, 6 to 8 catches, 100 yards and a touchdown, but I don't know that there's, 2 touchdowns going to them or to split among them. That's the tricky part. We could see, one of them could get the touchdown, 4 receptions, 48 yards and a score, and the other could get 10 catches for 120 yards, and you'd rather have the other guy, right? It's very hard to tell. They're not really consolidating stuff. They keep the defense off the other one, which is helpful, but that enables Stafford just to go to whichever one is open. Whereas Amon-Ra St. Brown has a more consolidated look. So I wanted him to be my captain. My cash games, that did not work out. So you guys can go take me on their team free money, EMac, in the $1 YouTube or DK lobby there. But Amon-Ra St. Brown probably will be at least my second most owned captain in the tournaments because I couldn't get there on the main slate. So that's how strongly I feel about that.
Yeah, and looking like Amon-Ra St. Brown, pretty clearly a top option to get to in this game, and north of half of my lineups, and a 25% in the captain spot. So if I just go and sort by captain exposures, which I always know is something that people like to ask us about, 25% of Amon-Ra St. Brown in the captain spot makes him my overall most rostered captain here on DraftKings. Certainly somebody to get to, and I think you brought up something that's a fairly astute, EMac, which is who is he competing with for targets? Relative to the Rams, not that many guys, right? So Sam Laporta is going to be playing today. How healthy is he going to be? My bet would be not particularly healthy. I don't think this is going to be a 100% Sam Laporta out on the field. Maybe he goes out and proves me wrong. I don't think so, though. So I'm on Ross St. Brown pretty clearly, and as is, he's normally the number 1 target for the Lions, but potentially even less competition for targets than he would normally see. Whereas on the Rams side, you got Puka Nacua as well as Cooper Kupp battling out for targets. And it was very difficult to predict which one of them would be the guy for the Rams on a week-to-week basis. Sometimes it would be Cooper Kupp. Sometimes it would be Puka Nacua. And it was really hard to guess as well. A lot of times people would chase the targets and route participation from prior weeks when trying to figure out who to roster between Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. And there was no real rhyme or reason to which guy would be on any given day. So if the Rams passing game blows up today, you don't know which guy it's going to be. If the Lions passing game blows up, you can feel pretty good it's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I agree with you. I think Amon-Ra is the guy to go to if you guys are rostering any of the spend-up wide receivers. And I will also now go and show you the exposures that I have here to him on FanDuel. Amon-Ra St. Brown on FanDuel, just like over on DraftKings, get into a bunch of them. 20% in the captain spot, 26.7% in the flex spot. And if I look at my overall captain exposures or MVP exposures on FanDuel, he is, just like on DraftKings, the most rostered multiplier spot that I have of any of these guys. So then on the flip side, EMac, I'm going to ask you, if Amon-Ra is the number one guy to get to of the stud wide receivers, who is your least favorite of Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp? Because that's going to be our default least favorite pay up wideout.
So it is going to be Puka Nacua. And that he did not make my cash game lineup. Cooper Kupp did. So somehow this will come back to haunt me. However, while he has had one of the more magical, unexpected seasons for a fifth-round draft pick who changed colleges because he couldn't quite get it done when he was at the University of Washington and transferred to BYU. I believe he had a couple other family members that were attending there at the same time, so that made a lot of sense. He ended up playing for the team there. I think his brother did as well, which is sort of why he picked that school. But I was surprised when you went back and looked at everything why was he even really a draft pick? Because even his numbers there were a little bit of a surprise. Hey, guess what? A lot of people said about Cooper Kupp when he popped into the league coming from Eastern Washington or wherever he came from as well. So I'm still going with Kupp. This is probably the healthiest he has been at this point in the season. He has the longer term connection with Stafford. It's the bigger game. I think he's going to go to the guy he trusts. Again, that is a tiebreaker only. Nacua also is, I know he's more expensive on DraftKings. He is $800 more on DraftKings, and that is a helpful $800. He is $2,500 cheaper on FanDuel. So I'm landing on Kupp. I suspect that is why the field will end up there as well. But that is my assessment.
Yeah, and if we go ahead and look at some of the exposures that I was getting to here on FanDuel, I'll take off the captain spot here and just look at the overall exposures. And Puka Nacua, right around even with the field, getting to him in 26% of lineups here in the flex. Cooper Kupp actually only in 18.7% of lineups. So why would that be the case here, Mac? Well, for leverage, right? So Cooper Kupp is projected for quite a bit more ownership on FanDuel than Nacua is. And just based on what we said before, where it's very hard to predict who's going to be the guy on a week-to-week basis, I do like going to Puka Nacua, not because I have any kind of real degree of confidence that he's going to be the guy, but because there's a lot of variance in the situation in terms of where the targets go. It's going to be the lesser owned of the two in Puka Nacua as the one I prefer to get to between Nacua and Kupp. Talking about the cheaper wide receivers, who is they really prioritizing on the lower end? Because we do have a couple of wideouts that were really popping up a lot. If you guys were using optimizers, if you're using simulations, both Jameson Williams as well as Demarcus Robinson were players that are making their way into lineups throughout the weekend. Now, there has been a little bit of a change to that, though, because it was an assumption earlier that Sam Laporta was not going to play, which is not the case anymore. He's going to be active, which could potentially take away some targets from Jameson Williams. But who's your preferred option as a pass catcher to save salary with EMac?
It's probably going to be Demarcus Robinson. I mean, at some point, this kind of has to be real. It's gone on for 6 weeks now. Let me get to my notes here. He scored 4 consecutive games between weeks 12 and 15, and then the week he didn't score was week 16. He had a 10-target game. He has essentially taken over Atwell's role, and Atwell looked great for the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. He is just back to, kind of the gadget guy, kick returner guy, technically Atwell's their kick returner. So he's just kind of out of the picture at this point. I guess this is the lucky moment that Demarcus Robinson is sort of having that Nelson Aguilar 2020 season where just everything is going his way. I guess we ride the streak one more time. Crash Davis said you got to respect the streak, as terrifying as this is. And as much as this feels like a train running into the side of a mountain, we're going back to Demarcus Robinson. I couldn't find a reason to not get him. And I loathe Demarcus Robinson for fantasy purposes.
Yeah, so for me, I actually am getting to more of Demarcus Robinson than Jameson Williams in this set of sims I have on the screen. My personal preference is to go to Williams, even though Laporta's in. I mentioned I don't think Laporta is going to be totally 100%, and there's a lot of big play upside in Jameson Williams, whereas Demarcus Robinson, I look at him as more of a guy who he's the third wideout for the Rams. It also wouldn't be surprising if he also fell behind Tyler Higbee as far as targets go for today. But if there was a scenario where Sam Laporta is just kind of out there as a decoy, then we would expect there to be more targets to go to Jameson Williams. And he is somebody with home run hitter type potential, a really high upside guy who could bring any screen at any point in time to the house for a touchdown. So I think he's somebody with a little bit more upside than Demarcus Robinson, really explosive young player. And we haven't seen a whole lot of Jameson Williams, and is somebody who was injured a lot during his rookie year. Then this year he was suspended due to, I think he was gambling at the team facility, if I'm not mistaken. He was using I think it was DraftKings Sportsbook app, actually, was placing some bets there in the team facility. So he gets caught, clearly an idiot. But now he's gotten back into the mix. And as we've seen him play better over the last few weeks, EMac, I really do think we have to consider this is somebody who's a really high draft pick that only has a handful of experience. We've only seen him play in so many games. We've only seen him run so many routes. So it does make sense that he would start to be showing some signs of improvement, which we did see down the stretch of the season. And if I'm not mistaken, also, I think by some of the next gen stats, at one point he had a rushing touchdown that was a few weeks ago, which I think was the fastest clock time anybody ever had, or was one of the fastest times in the next gen stats. So we know the kind of athleticism he has. And Jameson Williams, that's going to be a guy who, relative to showdown slates, project for ownership in the mid-20s. I do think that he's a pretty good contrarian-ish option to be getting to in Jameson Williams, and fairly cheap as well. So I'm going to like Jameson Williams on the low end. Are there any other wide receivers that are standing out to you?
No, I think you kind of hit everything. Just quickly looking, Donovan Peoples-Jones did make my cash lineup. It's because he's $800. We know he's going to be on the field, and I'm counting on a target or two. That's it. He could get a 0, and I'd be perfectly fine with that. Josh Reynolds is $5,000 on DraftKings. That's a rough price. I'm getting him on 3% of my lineups right now. The field's at 15, which feels sort of high, but I guess that's where I'm not going to him, I'm able to be over the field on players like Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I'm in line with the running backs, but I'm over on the quarterbacks. So it's interesting. And that's one thing fun playing with the Sims, though. I have done that for a little bit. Like if you start downgrading a player just so you get him out of the ROI boost and just see what kind of or boost his ROI down to get him out of some of the top plays, you can see different lineup constructions popping up. I haven't worked out the full navigation on this, Greg, but that was one way I thought was fun to kind of see different things here. But that's kind of what I've done here by cutting the projection a little bit for Reynolds. It turns out I didn't really need to because he wasn't going to get into my lineups anyway, except for I turned the randomness up really high. What are the Sims doing with him? Anything? Because it's the perfect remember us. I mean, a touchdown from him to from Goff to Josh Reynolds against their former team. I mean, movies are written about this kind of stuff, Greg. Does the Sims factor that in? I don't think so.
No, they don't. It's just it's simulating the games 40,000 times, each play being simulated. So wait,
that sounds more valuable than me making shit up.
Yeah, for sure. I generally don't really care about any kind of narratives, but Josh Reynolds is so he was projecting slightly better before Laporta was expected to play. And if I was going to roster one of the cheaper guys from the Lions, once again, I'd rather go to Jameson Williams than Josh Reynolds. He's only showing up in 10% of my top lineups on DK. Let's see for FanDuel. FanDuel, if I favorite my top lineups, on favorite the DraftKings ones, and then on FanDuel, if I favorite my top 150, I would be very surprised if any kind of meaningful amount of Josh Reynolds on FanDuel. And yeah, only 5%. So Reynolds, especially on FanDuel, there's only a half-point PPR bonus. He's not somebody who, other than a couple of lineups that he's showing up in, but still somebody who I'm well underweight to.
For everybody watching, don't forget, lock is at 8:15 tonight. That is different. Normally it's 8:20 on Sundays, but of course this is just the playoff weeks, so there's not as many games that can push into the window. So,
and the lock time move for absolutely no reason at all. You know that ESPN still has the game listed as starting at 8 p.m. Our data on the site has the game listed at 8 p.m. Initially, if people looked at our YouTube earlier in the day and they were trying to figure out what time the show started, it was listed at 8 p.m. The reason being is because That's what the time was. And then all of a sudden it moved to 8:15 sometime midday today. And then DraftKings FanDuel moved the lock times of their slates as well. But for the longest time, this game was not supposed to start at 8:15. And I would have preferred it at 8 to start EMac. We would have been done by now, could have been eating dinner, but not the case. And if you guys have any questions for us here, 10 minutes left to go until the start of the slate, throw it into the Discord chat for us. If you're a Stochastic member, any packages you guys sign up for do come with access to the Discord. And one thing also here that I want to go over is looking at some of the defense kicker exposures, because I'm noticing I'm getting to a whole bunch of the kickers here, EMac. Brett Maher showing up in a third of my lineups over on FanDuel. So Brett Maher looks like a really good source of salary savings. And then as well as over on DraftKings, I remember him showing up in a good amount of lineups as well. Maher, 52.7% of lineups, only with 25% projected ownership. So actually the player I'm most leveraged to on the entire slate, EMac, it is Brett Maher. What do you make of that? And I have a reasoning for this, but I want to know, what do you make of the kickers, in particular Brett Maher showing up in a lot of lineups for me?
You mean the fact that they're basically both replacement kickers? That doesn't concern you at all? Fortunately, they're kicking in a dome, but we want to remember that Maher is 34. He lost his job earlier this season to Lucas Haverisic, and once Haverisic lost his job, they brought in Mason Crosby as an option. Fortunately for Maher, he beat him out and regained his job back, but that's terrifying. He's barely replacement level at best, but he is the road kicker, and I give a slight nod to the money badger, Michael Bagley, who also was not the kicker for Detroit for most of this year because it was Riley Patterson who ended up losing his job. They did sign Maher and have him on the practice. Bagley. They had Bagley on the practice squad for most of the season, but he got called up. Patterson, by the way, yesterday kicked both of his extra points because he ended up signing with Cleveland after he got cut by Detroit. But these are all replacement level guys. I'm not excited by any of them. Again, the nice thing is they're in the dome, but I don't really like either of them. And normally I have nice things to say about the kickers. I just don't in this. I am coming in at literally the field. I'm all 100% even with the field. I'm 0.5% shy on each in my lineups compared to the field. So clearly I'm not a fan of them.
Yeah.
So to your point, there's a leverage opportunity. Maybe a couple touchdowns turn into field goals. The drives stall out. And Greg is making fun of me in Slack.
Well, most importantly, once we get into the playoffs and we talk about some of the showdown slates for the playoffs, in the regular season, there's frequently going to be, like those really cheap guys who only cost a couple $100 that are projected for a couple of fantasy points because somebody gets ruled out and you could plug them into lineups as a good source of salary savings. Once you get into the postseason, dudes are expected to play. They're going to be out on the field. We don't have as many guys that are missing games or anything like that. Teams rested players in week 18 other than Detroit Lions who got Sam Laporta hurt. So what ends up happening while he is playing today, not going to be totally healthy. But what ends up happening then when you get into the playoffs on these slates, EMac, is it is really hard to find value. And that's where some of the kickers really start to stand out. And sometimes the defenses as well, because where normally we might have, 3, 4, 5 guys that are priced at fairly cheap price points that we like as value options. That doesn't happen when everybody plays. That's where the kickers more come into play. So it's not like Maher is even projected for something outrageous here. It's 9 fantasy points. 9 fantasy points is enough for him to show up in north of half of my lineups. So the question with Maher is really, can he make 2 field goals and then do the Lions score a couple of touchdowns? If yes, he's right at his projection. And then it looks like he actually is somebody who should be way higher owned than he is because of the lack of options on the low end. So Brett Maher, for me, is somebody who's making into a lot of lineups. But is there anything else that you were seeing on the... Oh, actually, we got a super chat here from Malcolm Revamp who wants to know who we're liking for captain on DK. EMac, couple ways to look at this. Number one, who is your overall favorite captain? And then if you're looking to take a stab on a contrarian guy, who would that be at the captain spot?
So my cash game captain is Matt Stafford. My number one overall owned captain, and I'm just uploading my lineups right now, fingers crossed it goes, is St. Brown. If you're going to be contrarian, I think if you were to go with Wow, everybody's kind of single digits. I was going to say Kiren Williams, I think, would be contrarian. I essentially matched the field with him. I would go Jahmyr Gibbs. You're going to pay a little more on DraftKings. He does have the potential for 2 touchdowns. He would be your off-the-wall captain. He's coming in at right now at about 9%. And that would be some serious leverage.
Yeah,
against the field, not against any players.
If I go chalky, as you guys can see right here on screen, I'm on Ross St. Brown. Pretty clearly the guy who shows up in the most lineups here on both FanDuel and DraftKings, my most rostered guy here in the multiplier spot, and I'm on Ross St. Brown. If I'm going to be contrarian, though, Tyler Higbee, we've seen Higbee has been more of a threat in the red zone down the second half of the season. Most notably trolled me in a game where he was ruled inactive. If you remember, this happened about 2 months ago. Yes. There was a game where Tyler Higbee was ruled inactive for a game, to which I global swapped out of him because the game was supposed to start in like 20 minutes and just kind of came out of nowhere that he was going to be inactive. So immediately I scrambled, update all my lineups, take Tyler Higbee out of everything. And then we found out a few minutes before the game starts that, oh, no, he's actually going to be active. It was a misreport that he was going to be inactive. I had the Rams in my most stacked team on the entire slate. I don't go and change anything with Tyler Higbee because whatever, I took him out of my lineups. He hasn't been all that good anyway. And all those lineups are gone now. I don't have any way to go and remake them what they were. And then he goes out and he scores 2 touchdowns in the first quarter and immediately just made me very upset. But ever since then, he's been more of a threat in the red zone. So if we look at Tyler Higbee for the year, let's see, how many touchdowns did he score? And then what percentage of them were coming throughout the season? Because I think almost all of his touchdowns were scored actually in that one game, but also his targets in the red zone came more so in the second half of the season. And yeah, we all see that in his target share. So the last handful of games, 5 targets, 2 targets, 4 targets, 3 targets, 6 targets, whereas earlier in the season, he wasn't quite as involved in the passing game. So Tyler Higbee is only 1% owned in the contest generator showing up here in the captain spot. So he's somebody, if he just scores 1 touchdown, especially getting back to what I talked about with Brett Maher, it's very hard to find guys that we could reasonably want to save salary with. So go to Tyler Higbee, you're getting somebody who's really contrarian, who's also going to save you some money. Chalk option, I'm on Ross St. Brown. If you want to be contrarian today, then I think you should be going, or at least considering, Tyler Higbee as a contrarian option. Just a couple minutes left to go here, guys. If you haven't done it, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. But for FanDuel, if you're looking at MVPs, anybody different that you would answer with? Chalk option and then a contrarian option, EMac.
I would still try to get to St. Brown or Williams. My contrarian, it's not that contrarian to go to a quarterback, but I would take one of the quarterbacks.
Yeah, if we look at the quarterback exposures, we've got Stafford in the contest generator showing up in 15.1% of lineups by the field in the MVP spot. Goff 16.1. Same deal. If I'm going with a chalky captain / MVP, I'm on Ross St. Brown. That's my guy on both sides. However, on FanDuel, if I'm going to be contrarian, which way do I want to go to be contrarian? I'm going to go to Puka Nacua. He is projected for 11% ownership in the MVP spot here. But if we know what the flex ownership is, we are expecting Cooper Kupp on the whole to be more popular than Puka Nacua. And I do like some of that leverage there. Corey Shea has left us a super chat. EMac, he wants to know pick 2, Kiren Williams and Brock Wright, or Najee and Kincaid, or Deontay Johnson pick 2.
The first 2.
Yeah, Kiren Williams and Brock Wright. So it's really hard to know exactly what the status is going to be of Sam Laporta. Like, we know he's going to play, but we don't know how active he's going to be, how healthy he's going to look. I think there's an opportunity for him to just be a decoy, maybe only play half the snaps, and then Brock Wright to ultimately be involved. And at his price point, if Brock Wright just catches a couple of passes, he's realistic to be a contrarian option in a winning lineup. So Brock Wright and Kiren Williams, that is going to be the way that I want to go as well. And going to double check. We didn't get any questions in Discord here. So we're done, EMac. We have already reached the start of the game here. So if you guys have not done yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And don't forget also, we've got a promo going on right now. For the rest of the NFL season, we've discounted the price of the NFL Sims Max package. The reason being is because, well, there's less games left in the year. So want to make sure that there's still good value for people who are signing up, because there is no more Thursday night football. And there is going to be no more Monday night football games past this week either. So if you guys sign up now, $99, you're going to get access to it for the rest of the season. And PGA Sims, they're going to be free to anybody who's on an NFL Sims Max package for next week. So through January 21st, PGA Sims are going to be free for all NFL users. So guys, thank you very much for watching. That does it for EMac and myself. One more time to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Have a great finish to your weekend, guys. See you back here tomorrow for the holidays. Peace out.